Greetings and welcome. I'm going to go over some homework now. I've just sort of randomly selected a few of the problems that are in the homework. You may be going, well, I had a lot of homework for the first question, the first part, and that might be a little bit true. But I'm going to go over some of it most times, so watch this video and it should help you. The other thing I'm going to tell you is that I'm going to create a forum, and you can use this forum to discuss questions. Say, I don't understand number 7, and you can help each other. I do not want these forums to be an opportunity for you guys just to share your work and not actually do any homework. The forums are actually there for you to discuss and try to help each other. So I would recommend you looking at this. Because you can use the forum, I don't want you helping each other outside of the forums. No help outside of class unless you talk to me first about it, and no plans, no emailing each other. If I catch you doing that, I will have no choice but to consider it cheating. Now here we are, we have our first argument, I think therefore I am. What we have here is we have a premise, we have no premise indicator, we have a conclusion indicator which is therefore. So the thing that follows it is our conclusion, I am. This comes from Rene Descartes. He's saying, I think, and that proves his point that I am, that he exists. He says, I don't know that I am anything other than an entity that thinks, but insofar as I can think, I exist. Now one thing I want you to keep in mind is that, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that for your homework, at least for this one, I don't expect you to do every problem, to write out all the premises and conclusion. It'd take a lot of time. So for this, like for example, I just want you to write I am would be enough for your homework to turn in a Word file, and you're going to submit that. Don't bother to type premises, premises, I think, conclusion, just do I am, and that I'll know that you're putting the conclusion. Well, it's not a big deal in this one. When we get further down, you'll have 83 of these, and that would be no problem. Next, number 2. Either the maid committed the murder or the butler did it. The maid didn't do it, so the butler did it. Okay, so where's the conclusion? Well, we have the word so, which is a conclusion indicator, so we know that the butler did it is in fact the conclusion. That's the whole point being argued for. So the butler did it. You just type the butler did it for your homework. This is a form of argument called a disjunctive syllogism. We have a statement here which is either or, and we call that a disjunctive statement. Any either or, any or statement is disjunctive, meaning it's this or that, and so we call this a disjunctive syllogism, and it's a form in which you say either blank or blank. It's not one of those, so it has to be the other one. Okay, and it's called a disjunctive, or it's called a disjunctive syllogism. Let me type that out. Disjunctive syllogism. Disjunctive means either or. Syllogism means syllogism in logic is a specific argument form in which two premises are used to support one conclusion. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. A syllogism is a very specific argument form with two premises, one conclusion. In this case, there are two premises, either blank or blank. That's the first premise. The second premise is the maid didn't do it, and then you have your conclusion, the butler did. We'll talk about syllogisms later, but just giving you a little bit of a preview of what a syllogism is. Now, sorry, I had run through this before, and I had in there the definition of syllogism off this one. The next, number 3, all A's are B's, all B's are C's, therefore all A's are C's. This is, we have a conclusion indicator here, the word therefore, which means that all A's are C's is our conclusion because it's what follows that. This also is a syllogism. It has two premises and one conclusion. And it's actually what we call, this one here is what we call a categorical categorical syllogism. And what happens is it's a categorical because categories are things like all A's, all B's. And so it's saying all A's are B's. So everything that is an A falls in the category B. Everything that is a B falls in the category C, therefore all A's are C's. And so it's called a categorical syllogism because it's using categories to reach its conclusion. The next one is what I'm going to skip number 4 and go to number 5. If Bob makes the grade, then he goes to Harvard. Bob made the grade, thus Bob will go to Harvard. Once again, we have a conclusion indicator, thus, which makes this part the conclusion. And you can see how it's arguing for this. This is what we actually call a hypothetical syllogism, just for your information. 2 premises. If Bob makes the grade, then he goes to Harvard. Number 1, Bob made the grade. Number 2, thus Bob will go to Harvard. A hypothetical syllogism is a syllogism in which you use an if-then statement. Actually, this is even more specific type. It's actually called a modus ponens, and it's actually a very specific form of hypothetical syllogism. A modus ponens is Latin, and basically anytime you have an if-then statement, and the part that follows the if is true, then the part that then you know the part that follows the then is true. So in this case, if Bob makes the grade, we'd say if A, then he goes to Harvard. If A, then B. A is true, Bob made the grade, Bob makes grades the if part, and thus the B part is true. If A, then B, A is true, therefore B is true. And that's exactly what happens. So it's called a modus ponens. We'll talk more about that later. Number 8, we're going to skip a few. All Euclidean triangles have as a sum of their interior angles 180 degrees. This triangle is Euclidean, so this triangle has as a sum of its interior angles 180 degrees. Now, what we have here is we have a categorical syllogism of sorts. Once again, we're using a category, trying to say everything within that category has a certain attribute. It says this falls within that category, therefore it has that attribute. We can look here and say, how do we know what the conclusion is? Well, the word so is a conclusion indicator, and so the part here is what's being argued for. All right, number 10, skip number 9. The world is similar to a watch. A watch must have a maker. Therefore, the world had a maker. God is the maker of the world. For these reasons, God exists. Now, this one is a little bit of a tricky one. We have 2 conclusions, or 2 conclusion indicators. Therefore, and for these reasons. Now, as I told you, there's only one conclusion in any argument. So we have to say, where is our conclusion? You know, what is our conclusion in this? And the answer is that, sorry, I'm just looking at how much time I've used. So I'm sorry that I have to pop that up in front. So what happens here is that, therefore, is a conclusion indicator. For these reasons is a conclusion indicator. So what happens is that we can say, you know, the world had a world maker, God is the maker. I'm sorry. Therefore is a conclusion indicator. For these reasons is a conclusion indicator. Now, what's going on here is we kind of have to ask ourselves is, the world had a maker and God exists. What's ultimately the point they're trying to argue for? For example, the world is similar to a watch. A watch must have a maker. Therefore, the world had a maker. Well, that's essentially an analogical argument saying a watch and a world are very similar, and if the watch has a maker, then the world must be similar in the way that it also has a maker. And then it goes on from there to say God is the maker of the world. For these reasons, God exists. So what happens is essentially all the rest of this, that first conclusion, therefore part, is actually being used to support the ultimate conclusion, which God exists. This is sort of a sub-conclusion or sub-argument. The first 3 lines, the first 3 sentences are a sub-argument. And that conclusion of that sub-argument is being used to support the final conclusion, which is God exists. So we would put this as our conclusion. God exists is our conclusion. Ultimately, it is what depends upon all the rest of it is supporting that point. That point is not helping support the therefore point. This isn't being supported by God exists. It's this, the world had a maker, that supports God exists. Number, 18. In emergency at sea, women and children should be first. People allowed into the lifeboats. Elderly people should not be allowed on first because they have already had an opportunity at life. Adult men should not be allowed into lifeboats because they are more likely to survive in the water than women or children because they have more muscles. Now, to begin with, we have some of these becauses, right? let's find the others. Because now these becauses are premise indicators. So elderly should not be allowed on first because they have already had an opportunity in life. To a certain degree, that because is saying elderly people should not be allowed on first is our conclusion, because and it's giving you the reason. But that isn't our ultimate conclusion. And the same thing, adult men should not be allowed on first because, and that gives a reason for that. So these are kind of indicating sub-arguments. But in the end, there's no premise indicator for what the overall argument is. And second of all, there's no conclusion indicator in this whole thing. So what happens is we need to sort of think back to a rule, which is that in lieu of, or in lack of, a conclusion or premise indicators, look at the first sentence. And the first sentence is oftentimes the conclusion of an argument because you put your conclusion, the point you're trying to make, up front. So in this case, that is what the conclusion is. Finally, number 20 is the last one I'll do for you. And it says you should always drive with car insurance for a couple of reasons. First, car insurance can protect you against liability after a crash, because car insurance, we have a conclusion, a premise indicator, because car insurance will pay for damages to others even if you are at fault. Second, car insurance can help you pay your medical bills after a crash instead of you being responsible for all of them. And third, car insurance is good for society. If you are sent to the hospital after a wreck, if you don't have insurance, the hospital is still obligated to treat you, and so the hospital has to raise the prices on everyone else's service to cover your stay. So car insurance can keep hospital fees down for everyone. Now, we have this so, which is a conclusion indicator. So the question is car insurance can keep hospital fees down for everyone? Is that the point of this whole thing? Well, no. Because if you look at the first few sentences are car insurance can help you pay your medical bills, car insurance can help you even if you're at fault, things like that. That's not really supporting for the fact that car insurance is good for all of society because it keeps hospital fees down. So ultimately what we have with this is this is sort of a sub-conclusion. If we look at this, everything on this point from third down is really its own argument. Car insurance is good for society. If you were sent to the hospital after a wreck, blah, 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 blah. All of the scoring can keep fees down for everybody. And then the others are basically supporting this overall point, which is the first sentence. And that is, you should always drive with car insurance for a couple of reasons. You don't really need for a couple of reasons. You should always drive with car insurance. For a couple of reasons indicates that this is going to be supported. For a couple of reasons, the reasons are about to follow, and then they list them first, second, that type of thing, which helps us to realize where those premises are. So some of this is going to be a little bit of a mix of things, and you need to keep that in mind. There's a little bit of a mix of always look to the first sentence, look for the conclusion indicators, look for the premise indicators, but ultimately think, what's the point they're trying to make? And that's sort of the key or most important point of this whole thing. Alright, hope you have good luck, and if you have any questions, please email me.